why smart landlords choose bad tenants and lose tens of thousands of dollars, and how you can avoid the same mistake. And it comes down to trusting science instead of trusting your own biases or your own gut. I'm going to talk about a book today called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Peace Prize winner for his work on behavioral economics. He's a psychologist who bridged the gap between psychology and economics to come up with some really cool stuff that will help you in your everyday life, and especially help you in real estate investing, being a landlord, business person in general. This is the Rich on Money podcast, episode 24. And what he talks about in his book, to me, it's most applicable to choosing people to do a job. And I would say hiring someone to work for you. And when it comes to being a landlord, finding someone to live in your rental property and take care of that asset and take care of that investment for you. We as humans are wired incorrectly and often make the wrong decisions instead of relying on what actually matters and what will actually get you the correct results. Why do people choose the wrong employees or pick the wrong tenants? It's because we have two brains and we use the wrong brain to make the decision. The book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman talks about having two brains. One brain is the fast brain. It's an autopilot brain. It's your hunch brain. It's the brain that makes split-second decisions, that you decide very quickly about things and people. It is great for emergencies. It is great for fight or flight. It is very bad for business decisions, like choosing a tenant, like hiring someone. What's an example of this? Hiring someone with red flags, but they seem nice, or they're attractive, or they hit on you. That's the fast brain. They call it System 1 in the book. System 2 is the slow brain. Careful thinking, needs effort to use, better for money decisions. System 2, or the slow brain, is when a landlord would look at important things like income, credit history, prior rental reference, criminal history, or lack of. So we have these two different brains. What's the problem with brain 1 or system 1? It tricks us in 5 ways I'll go over quickly, but number 5 is the big one that I'm really focusing on today. Number 1 is the halo effect, and that is you can assume that someone is good at everything if you can find one thing they're good at or one way that they look. In other words, maybe they're clean cut, polite, attractive, interesting. That leads you to believe that everything else about them is good. Halo effect, often wrong. How about the availability bias? Something that our brains screw us up on. One thing that I've always really done in real estate investing that is strange is I've really shied away from having ceiling fans in my houses. And that is because maybe on one of the first properties I ever had, one of the first problems I ever had was that the person was saying that the ceiling fan was unbalanced. And then another tenant, maybe 6 months later, told me that the ceiling fan blade fell off accidentally and hit them in the face, when in reality, they probably just broke it themselves. From this, I decided that all ceiling fans are bad and should never be in properties. It's probably not true, but that's kind of because I had those experiences early on, how I've shaped reality. Same thing with like a dog that destroys a rental. And it's kind of like, well, then dogs are bad forever. There's something called confirmation bias. This is number 3. The confirmation bias is you look for things that prove you right. You keep looking and looking until you find proof of what you're looking for. Maybe you've decided ahead of time you're going to like this person. You want to hire them. You're going to look hard to find reasons to hire them and try to minimize or ignore red flags. And I have lots of videos about red flags. You should check them out. Loss aversion. We hate losing more than we love winning. What's an example of this? Not getting rid of a bad tenant because you're thinking, well, then it'll be vacant for a while. That's horrible thinking. The tenant's going to cost you a fortune. You need to cut your losses, take that vacancy, put somebody else in there. The number 5 reason that our brain tricks us, and this is the one that I want to emphasize the most, and this has the most useful lesson, I think, for life, for investing, certainly for real estate, overconfidence. Our fast brain, our quick brain, system 1. We think we're better judges than we are, and we are not. We are not awesome judges. We cannot predict the future as well as we think we can. We trick ourselves into thinking that we do. Again, if you listen to my content, you know how much I don't like day trading. I don't like short-term trading. I don't like the idea of crypto. But I think that's this idea that you can get good at guessing where markets are going to go and come in at the right time and get in and out. I don't like timing the market for the same reason. A belief that people are sometimes good at predicting the future or their hunches are better than other people's hunches. Why you'd sign up for somebody's newsletter that could help you invest or help you day trade or, I don't know, help you get dates. None of it works. Have you ever thought to yourself, I can judge a tenant in 10 seconds. Give me 10 seconds with them and I'll know if they're a good tenant or not. You won't. You'll be wrong. They'll be wrong more than you're right. That's what I'm trying to tell you today. And that is the research that comes from this book. It's a very thick book, very difficult to read. I'm going to summarize it for you in a way that will be useful in your life. Now, let me talk about the research that was done in this book, which essentially informs the core lesson of this book to me. Because again, very thick book. I'm going to summarize it for you. The research that is very useful to our lives shows that in doing things like hiring people, they talk about in hiring, in teaching, in judging soldiers, whether or not they'll be successful in the future, and in choosing people to get loans, they simply found that simple scoring beats out personal judgments. And what I mean by that is objective criteria of things you can measure always beats out subjective criteria depending on how you feel, your gut, how you look at them, how they look. It's really objective versus subjective, the facts versus the feelings. It turns out based on this research that even though we always think that our feelings can help in these decisions, when we use objective facts to make decisions, and think of a bank, right? The way that a bank might decide on giving someone a loan, I think you all know it's pretty objective. They're not going to get in there and decide if they like you or not, but you've got to show that you've got the income, show your credit history, have a debt to income ratio that works. If you were to throw in personal preference into that, to either deny or approve somebody that wouldn't have been approved, you're going to be wrong in that decision. Same thing with hiring somebody to do a job. They also did this thing where they predicted who would be successful soldiers, who would do well, who would become leaders, who would excel. They used objective criteria to score people and then watched how they performed throughout their careers. They also tried to get the smartest people, the best leaders, the most innovative people to make judgments of these same people, make predictions about their future, and then see how those predictions turned out in real life. And overwhelmingly in this book, you can read it or you can just listen to me explain it, but overwhelmingly, the objective criteria that would usually predict whether or not somebody does good is the best way to do things. And the subjective criteria, where you interview someone and you have a good feeling, or they're attractive, or they're likable, or they seem squared away or dependable, these things were not good indicators of how things were going to turn out. Nowhere near as good as the objective facts. Instructors could not spot the future leaders. They were wrong almost every time. Basic checklists predicted success better. What kind of things? Well, if we're looking at the military example, we'll talk about people that have maybe won awards in their job, right? What their scores were on certain aptitude tests, what their scores were on physical fitness tests, the amount of relevant experience they had coming into the job. Things that you could just have a checklist for or have a point systems for are far better at predicting outcomes than your own selective biases for, your own judgment on. Our judgment is often wrong, but we trick ourselves into thinking that it's often right because we really reward ourselves when it is right. And we really tend to remember that. And we tend to ignore or forget the examples of when we were dead wrong. Now, what am I obviously saying about picking renters, picking tenants? Obviously, what I'm saying is things like good prior rental reference, 3 times the rent as income, credit score, and then things like whether or not they have evictions, felonies, bankruptcies. Those are excellent predictors of whether or not these people are going to pay you on time and be good tenants. But there are lots of landlords out there, landlords that have dozens of properties, maybe hundreds. I know some Section 8 people like this. They're just kind of like, I just talked to somebody and I talk to them, and if I get a good feeling, then I go with them. Sometimes those landlords are successful, but they're not successful from picking good tenants. I know some people like this. They're always running around chasing that money. Where's my money? Where's my money? I don't do that with my tenants. They're successful because they're flipping houses well, or they're finding amazing deals and buying cheap. Great. But you'll make the most money if you also pick good tenants. And if you stick to objective criteria or factual criteria and ignore the gut feelings, ignore the personal judgments, forget about them. You might as well never meet them in person. I don't want to meet my tenants in person. I don't have to see them. I don't have to see a picture of them. I don't have to meet them in person. I've had lots and lots of tenants that I've never met, moved in, stayed with me for a long time, moved out, never met them. Everything was great. They were happy. I was happy. They were taken care of. I was taken care of. So knowing all this, how do we outsmart our brain? How do we outsmart the system one that we want to use, the hunches? Don't trust your gut. Have systems in place and follow those rules. The fast brain, the gut, makes bad decisions. The slow brain, When you slow down and use the slow brain and think, you make good decisions. You use the fast brain, maybe in life-threatening situations, to run away or defend yourself or adrenaline rush or all that. Slow brain, you use that for financial decisions, important decisions, and only the slow brain, not a combination of the two. You don't bring in the fast brain to override what your slow brain told you should do. So slow down big decisions, build systems that are based on facts that should let you choose the right outcomes. Obviously, this applies to finding a tenant. It could also apply to hiring someone to take care of your rental business, hiring a personal assistant, any business you can think of, any side hustle you might be doing. Some examples of where I've made mistakes by trusting my gut. I can think of a couple right at the top of my head. I think of my second rental property in Montgomery, Alabama. I know the exact address. I bought it for a great price. It was move-in ready. My very first tenant on my second property here in Montgomery. Very first tenant. Okay, at the time, I just hired property managers because I knew I was moving away soon. Property managers came to me and they're like, we got a dilemma here. We found a renter for you, and some of us want to rent to her, and some of us don't. We're split. Your house, you get to make the decision. And I'm like, oh my God, I get to make a decision. I get to make this cool decision. It was a single mom, who was down on her luck because of a divorce, had income problems. She was very sweet, and the people in the office all fell in love with her. And they wanted to break their criteria and ask me if I'd be willing to break the criteria they had in place to let her live there because she just seemed like she just needed a break. And look at me, I have a chance to do something beautiful. I have a chance to help, right? I have a chance to do something altruistic, which I've never done before. So I did. Oh no, she never paid a bit of rent, never paid a penny until, unfortunately, she was evicted. And she dragged her feet and she used all these legal ways to stay in the house longer, trash the place. And I learned a powerful lesson that day. I had a polite tenant that never paid rent. Super polite. Met him in person and I'm like, how could this person ever be a problem? They were polite throughout the process of evicting them. They were polite until the sheriff showed up and threw them out. Third example was I had a tenant who, after a year and a half, I realized that they had paid the late fee. They were late every single month. I'm getting a late fee every single month. That's cool. But I was always begging them to pay, chasing down the money, worried that I'd have to evict them. But they kind of understood that I would not let it go past 2 or 3 weeks late without getting real tough on them. And so they didn't get later. Yeah. And then one time they're just like, hey, look, IRS has got me. I owe so much money. I can't pay the rent anymore. This told me. So I had to evict them. And by the way, these evictions I'm talking about, I'm pretty much naming all the evictions I've ever had in the last 20 years. I wondered what mistake I made with him because I had my objective criteria and I was very careful about it. And I wanted to go back in my records and look and see what did I miss in his background? Why did I let him move into the property when he ended up always being late and having to evict him? And so I went back and looked. I never ran a credit and background check on him, just didn't run one. Probably got too busy, probably just processes fell apart, things were going on. Had I ran a credit and background check, I would have found out that he had several evictions and that my eviction attorney knew him by name. Moral of the story is use your checklist, forget about your gut feelings. This works well in the landlord business. This works well in business in general. This works well in hiring. In hiring, you would take something like, you guys know my criteria, right? You know the criteria I have for rentals. 3 times rent income, good prior renter reference, at least 600 credit score or better, no evictions, no felonies, no bankruptcies, criteria like that, and apply it to any job you're hiring for. What are things you'd look for that would make it more likely those people are good? Right. Tests they've taken, certifications they have, checks you can do on them. Use those criteria to pick the right person. Don't use the gut feelings. You've got 2 brains. A fast one and a slow one. Use the slow one for anything that will cost you money because that slow one is the one that takes time and effort and uses facts and common sense. If you follow rules instead of following your gut, you will have better outcomes in life, real estate, and business. So in your rentals and your finance and your daily life, don't think fast, think smart. This is Rich from the Rich on Money podcast, episode 24, signing off.